Please remain standing or rise as you are able to participate in the reading of the Gospel of Luke. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly two men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen clothes by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. How many of you planted bulbs last fall? Oh, there's a few people here with faith. That's good. My bulbs are coming up, and I'm so excited because every day I go out and I search for that new life poking up through the soil. I've been waiting patiently, or sometimes not so patiently, for those shoots to push up through that cold, wet soil. And every spring, after wading through the endless winters of Minnesota, I finally see those little tiny shoots of green emerge. And every year, without fail, I'm filled with wonder that this continues to happen year after year, no matter how many polar vortexes and snowstorms we have to endure, even into April. I'm just saying. I'm always perplexed when I put that anti-rabbit stuff on and the rabbits still eat the shoots. Does that happen at your house? It's Easter, and we see all the beautiful flowers today, and it isn't very hard to make the connection between the natural signs of spring and the story of Jesus' resurrection. We do it all the time. Many of the Easter hymns make the connection between the budding and the emerging and the Easter resurrection, and one of those hymns is Hymn of Promise by Natalie Sleeth. She wrote a hymn reflecting on the death of a friend, and it's based on the words of a poem by T.S. Eliot. She makes that connection in these beautiful words. In the bulb there is a flower, in the seed an apple tree, and cocoons a hidden promise. Butterflies will soon be free. In the cold and snow of winter there's a spring that waits to be, unrevealed until its season. Something God alone can see. In our end is our beginning, and our time infinity. In our doubt there is believing. In our life eternity. In our death a resurrection. At the last a victory. Unrevealed until its season. Something God alone can see. When we think about cocoons and butterflies and bulbs and flowers emerging in God's time, it's a beautiful idea that resurrection of Jesus is just another one of those stories that reminds us that if we just wait long enough, all that is dormant will spring to life, all in God's timing. That hope is believable and it's reasonable. And yet, is this really what Luke is trying to say about the resurrection as he gives his account of the Easter story? Was Jesus just dormant there in the tomb? And are we ourselves just in a holding pattern, waiting patiently or not so patiently through pain, suffering, loss, and death, hoping that after we endure all the ups and downs of life and death, all that life can throw us, we can hope that new life will arise and bloom again? Are our lives just some kind of a cosmic waiting room? That hope is good to have, that we will have new life at the end of our lives, but do we have to wait for resurrection? I wonder. Because when I read the Easter account in Luke, there just isn't much there about natural rhythms or cocoons and butterflies or anything else emerging from the dormancy, revealing a hidden promise. So what is Luke's story really about then? What does it tell us about resurrection and what it could mean for our lives today? Well, Luke tells us there were women there that went to the tomb on Easter Sunday to anoint Jesus' dead body with spices. They go to the gravesite to visit the dead body, and they did not go there expecting a resurrection. Now, dead bodies in those days weren't all that perplexing or terrifying. They're just dead. And people anointed dead bodies because it was the custom. The women went to the tomb, and as they approached the tomb, they could see that the stone had been rolled away. So they stooped down and they entered into the tomb, because tombs in those days were often built in caves. They were usually large enough for a whole family of boxes and bones to be laid there. You see, when someone would die, they would take the body and wrap it up in cloths, almost like a mummy, and then they'd let the body decompose. And when it was fully decomposed, with only the bones left, they'd transfer the bones into a box called an ossuary. It's a box about yay long. It's about the length of the longest bone in your body, which is your femur. And they could stack these boxes up in the tombs. So when the women went to the tomb that day, they went to anoint the body because, as you can imagine, composting bodies stink. But they find that the body is not there. And Luke tells us that they are perplexed. Why? Because these women saw James put Jesus' dead body in that grave on Friday, and now it's gone. And that is perplexing. Where did it go? Suddenly, two men in dazzling white clothes are standing among the women, and now the women are perplexed and terrified. Now, don't miss this. The women are so terrified that Luke tells us they put their faces way down. They're either trying to make themselves really small because they're so terrified and they wish they could just disappear, or maybe they're so awestruck in the presence of angels they bowed in terrified respect and worship. We don't really know. But I wonder, have you ever felt so afraid that it felt like you were getting smaller and smaller under the weight of your fears? I have. Then those dazzling men asked the women a question they will never forget. Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee? And then it all comes back to them. It is a big aha moment. The women do remember Jesus' words and all the words that he had talked about his rising that seemed so obscure when Jesus had said them out of context. But now, as they stood at the empty tomb, they started to make sense. The truth of the resurrection becomes real for them as they begin to put all the pieces together. They remember, they hear, they see, and that changes everything for them. So they run back to tell the disciples, and they rest, and the good news that Jesus had risen. And I imagine they were overjoyed and they were gobsmacked all at the same time. Have you ever been gobsmacked? I just like saying that word. It was unbelievable. Jesus is risen. And yet they had heard the angels and seen the empty tomb, and now they can't contain themselves. But imagine their disappointment when they tell the disciples and the others, and the disciples just yawn and say, "Are you kidding me? This must be an idle tale. Fake news." Have you ever had an experience that filled you with wonder and joy? Such wonder and joy that nobody wanted to hear about it? I have. Peter was one disciple that had to go see for himself. He got up and he ran to the tomb and he stooped and looked in and he saw the cloths there all by themselves with no body in them. And Jesus says, Luke says, he went home amazed. I wonder, who are you most like in the story? Are you like the women who were perplexed and terrified, but when they were reminded of what Jesus had said and then everything fell into place for them? Are you a person who knows Jesus, who's walked with Jesus, who's seen and heard his voice, and now you're ready to share the good news with others? Are you anxious to tell others the good news, or have you forgotten how? Are you here this morning because you wonder if you need to be reminded once again about the power of Jesus' love and resurrection for your own life? How often we get into situations in life when we are so perplexed and even terrified, and we forget that God has the power to do what we can't even yet imagine, even raising the dead. Or maybe you're more like Peter. Maybe you'd like to believe that God can raise the dead, but you'll have to stoop down and see the empty grave before your curiosity can turn to amazement. It's one thing to say you believe in the power of resurrection, but it's quite another to actually believe it and live your life different because of it. I wasn't really convinced early on in my life about the power of the resurrection until I really started to take a look around me. I had to take the time to stoop down and to look into all the empty graves around me. I took a look and I saw about 500 people come through the doors at Hennepin. They come every single week for AA meetings. We have 7 AA groups here. And I see these people coming and they're working their steps to stay sober. Sometimes I see them out in the parking lot having a smoke during the break time. And when I began to think about what was going on there, I began to see what God is doing as I see the joy on their faces of hundreds of people who are breaking free from their tombs of addiction, one day at a time, one step at a time. Then I took a look in our Dignity Center. Almost every day during every week of the year, people like Jim stop in at our Dignity Center to sit down with their advocates, with lawyers and mental health professionals, and then they stay for a nice hot lunch as they gather around the table and form community over a meal and break bread together in our dining room table at the ministry house. And I couldn't help but be amazed to see how God is using ordinary people like you and me to break open tombs of poverty and homelessness. Then I took a look at what happens every Tuesday night here at Hennepin. Each week I see guys coming in the doors for Twin Cities Gay Men's Chorus. They come for choir practice, and I hear them singing their hearts out in the art gallery. It's a loud sound. There's over 150 of them. And when I'm in the building and I hear them singing, I stop whatever I'm doing and I pray for them. And I give God thanks because I know that for some of them, coming into a church, any church, well, it's scary. But they found their way here to Hennepin, and they are welcomed and treated with love and respect. And I see God breaking open tombs of resentment and hurt that churches all over the nation have built around our LGBTQ siblings over the years. And then I took a look in our East Entry, because every single day I see people coming through our doors at all hours of the day and the night. And some of them linger there by the reception desk, and some sit down and have a cup of coffee. I see them lingering there and laughing and sharing stories and sometimes even crying. As they talk with the receptionists and our staff and others, sharing a story or a memory, I see Jesus breaking people out of their tombs of loneliness. Every single day, God is breaking open tombs and setting people free. Every single day. You simply can't miss it if you're able to stoop down and look around. And I'm sure you could add your own breakthrough stories, because God doesn't just work in this church or in this neighborhood. God is breaking open tombs everywhere, all around the world, in Biwala, in Eurasia, at our borders, in our state houses, in our schools, on our college campuses, and on our streets. Everywhere you look, you can see God breaking through with resurrection power when we take the time to get down on our knees and take a look, just like Peter did. I hope you'll share your breakthrough stories with each other, with your family, with your friends, with your neighbors, because that's how Easter becomes real for most people. It's finally being able to see that it isn't about a tomb in the first century Palestine. Resurrection is just so much bigger than that. It's about the amazing, life-giving, transforming power of God to break through our blindness, our stubbornness, and our resistance so that God can finally set us free. It's finally realizing that God's powerful love that can raise the dead cannot be stopped, cannot be contained, and must be shared. Now, I realize that there may be some of you who are saying to yourself, I'm not like the women. I don't remember, and I don't even know the words of Jesus. And I haven't seen any empty tombs yet, so I guess I'm not like Peter. So maybe you're wondering if you're most like the disciples who said to the women, you're just telling idle tales. Perhaps the resurrection story sounds to you like an idle tale. To you, the Easter story may seem strange and just a little crazy, and I was that person myself for years. I wondered, how can a 21st century thinking, educated person believe in this story of resurrection? But then I really gave it some thought. Something must have changed the minds of those disciples that eventually broke open their tomb of doubt, because history tells us that those very same disciples later risked their own lives to start the church. They were the ones that kept Jesus' movement alive. And without them, we wouldn't be here in this church today, because there wouldn't be any churches. How could this have happened? We can never be sure, but God has a way of breaking through the thickest walls we can build. Perhaps they said, we aren't exactly sure about what happened here, but our lives have been changed because we knew and loved Jesus. And he loves us. Resurrection or not, we'll keep on loving and living the way of Jesus, and we'll show others how to do it too. Friends, we'll never know exactly what changed the disciples' minds, but we can know that whenever we love each other as if every single person is Jesus, that same love that has the power to burst tombs open is with us. And that love grows. Nothing can stop it. Nothing can contain it. And it will always have the last word. Always. And that is simply amazing.